What's up, design family, and welcome to another episode of FittDesign TV. On today's episode, we have a technical tutorial on how to measure out ladies' leggings for design purposes. If you've ever wondered what the key measurements are that you should consider when designing and creating ladies' leggings, watch this video, you're going to find out. Hey guys, and welcome to FittDesign TV. So glad to have you here. On this channel, we discuss all things sports fashion, graphic design, manufacturing, and technology. We'll discuss key topics, answer pressing questions, and provide actionable steps on starting your own product line. If you're interested in any of the above topics, stick around. You're in for a good one. When looking at the female legging, we have to understand its nature as a compressive garment. Therefore, it fits quite tightly, and the measurements that make up the fit have to be considered really carefully so that they don't ride correctly or incorrectly on the wearer. With the female physique, you have to understand that there are a ton of different body shapes, but we're going to consider the standard female physique, where you have your waist as the thinnest part of the width of your body, flares out into your hips, and then more into your widest hips, so it flares even more out into your widest hips, and then it tapers down your thighs, your calves, and then to your ankles. Like I said, of course, there are many different types of fits. That's why it's extremely hard to design for females and fit for females. There are many different sizing charts and measurements that you could have, but we're going to limit our scope for the sake of simplicity. There are two subsets of measurements that you have to consider, and those fall into the width categories and the height categories. And manipulating each of these measurements is going to have a profound impact on how your garment fits. Within each of these categories, you have further measurements that you have to consider. We'll start off with the width measurements. What you'll need is a good measuring tape, a tailor tape with inches on one side and centimeters on the other side, something flexible so that you can run it up and down the measurements that you need, and something lightweight and handy and durable as well. Second, you need a flat surface. That's essential when we're measuring our garments. If you have anything with a sloped or a surface that is uneven, that's going to impact and skew your measurements. And the last is the garment that you're wanting to fit. In this case, we're using a pre-designed garment, and we're going to explain where the measurements that would have been considered when making this garment or designing or fitting this garment are, so that you can consider these measurements and how they'll impact your garment moving forward. The first, we're going to look at the width measurements, and we're going to start from up to down. We'll start off with the waist. The waist is typically the thinnest part of the width of your body, and it sits around 1 to 2 inches above the female belly button. Next, we'll look at the hips. So I'll call these the top hips, and then you have the widest hips. In terms of measuring, it's quite easy and it's not rocket science. You'll take your measuring tape and measure parallel to the top of the measurement line that you want from edge to edge, making sure that you are going from edge to edge and you maintain your line parallel. You don't want any slack in your measuring tape. You want to make sure that it's tight and taut and that you're getting as accurate a reading as possible. So from the top of the waistband to the other top of the waistband, so from left side to the right side, that's going to be your waist measurement. Next, we'll look at your top hip measurement. So the top hip measurement line typically sits at the seam where the waistband fabric and main body fabric meet. Simple in terms of getting your measurement. It's the same idea of making sure your tailor tape is tight and taut so that you don't have any slack and you're not getting a misread on your measurement, and you're going from edge to edge with your waist measurement. In terms of how the top or the waist and your top hip relate, in our experience, there's typically around 1 to 1.5 inches of difference between these measurements as the waist flares out into the top hips. The second is going to be your widest hip measurements, which is going to be the widest of the three measurements that we're talking about. Your waist measurement is going to be measured at the crotch line. So the crotch line is at your crotch area, and the bottom of that area is where your crotch line would sit. We'll take our measuring tape, we'll make sure that things are laid out as flat as possible, and then we'll measure from end to end, making sure our tape is taut and tight throughout, in order to get an accurate reading. Why is this measurement important, and why do these three measurements make a lot of sense together? Having a straight cut, you'll end up with a very unflattering garment where you have to accommodate for the hips, which are going to be the widest, and then as you come in towards the waist, you're not going to have enough tightness or tension in your fabric to accommodate for that inward slope. So you're gonna end up with too much fabric on the waist, and it's not gonna fit correctly, and it's not gonna compress. And likewise, when you go straight out from the waist down to your hips, you'll notice that your garment's going to be extremely tight, and it's going to end up riding on your waist area, creating unnecessary tension and causing first discomfort, and second, it's not going to be aesthetically pleasing. It's going to create some rolls there, and it's just not going to fit in a flattering way. So understanding how these three measurements move with each other and how they relate to each other in terms of one being the narrowest and the other being the widest is key in terms of fitting your garment. Next, going down, we'll look at your thigh measurement. So your thigh opening measurement is important. It starts to dictate your individual legs. So we've discussed the midsection. Now we want to look at the legs. How is the garment fitted on the legs? The first measurement we're going to take is the thigh opening measurement, which is going to be from the crotch line, so the center of the crotch area, all the way perpendicularly to the outside of the outseam. And we'll discuss what the outseam is in a second, and that's going to help dictate how much width you have in that area in order to get your leg through. If it's too narrow, it's not going to be possible for you to get your leg through, or it's just going to be super uncomfortable in the area and it's going to create these tension lines. And if it's too wide, you're just going to have too much excess fabric and it's going to show in that area, and you're going to end up with the kind of crumpling or the rippling of the fabric, and it's going to be very, very clear and sort of, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb on a compressive garment like a legging. The next measurement that we want to look at, the next width measurement in terms of your legging or the leg portion of your leg, is going to be your calf measurement. So once you have your thigh opening measurement, you want to look at your leg opening measurement, or sorry, your calf measurement, which is typically going to be measured 10 inches away from your ankle hem. So you take a measuring tape, 10 inches, you mark it, and then you measure across from inseam to outseam perpendicularly, and that will be your calf measurement, 10 inches away from the ankle. The last is going to be your ankle hem width measurement, and that's exactly where it is. It's at the ankle, from the inseam to the outseam, measure tight across. In terms of our width measurements, those are the key 6 measurements that we're going to consider, from our waist to our top hip, to our widest hip, to our thigh opening, to our calf, and then to our ankle. Now we want to look at our length measurements. We have to understand that with length measurements, you have your 3 key measurements, which are your outseam. So it's exactly what it sounds like. It's from the outer side of your leg to your inseam, so from the bottom of your crotch down to the inside of your ankle, and then you have your rise. And I'll explain what the rise is in a bit, but we'll start off with the outseam. The outseam is the most straightforward to measure, from the top, the very top portion of the waistband, down to the bottom of the ankle, making sure you maintain tension throughout your measuring tape. That's your outseam. Your inseam is going to be measured from the bottom of your crotch area down to the bottom of your ankle, making sure that you move out your leggings, so you have to kind of make sure that you can get as straight a line as possible. It's a little bit tough because naturally the garment wants to curve in to accommodate for the kind of like the crotch area, that midsection, but we want to get as accurate a measurement as possible, and that will be our inseam. Our outseam and our inseam relate, and now the last in the trifecta is actually 2 measurements that make up the rise. When we consider the rise here, we have our front rise and our back rise. Why is our front rise and our back rise different, right? Like, you wouldn't think that you would have more fabric in a certain area, but that's actually not true because of the human anatomy and the fact that our bodies, when we're sitting straight, we're actually not straight. So if you look at the midsection, it's actually not straight. Because of our rear, there's actually a bit of a tilt in the way that our physique sits, with our rear being more prominent in terms of mass, and the same is definitely true for both men and women. It's more accentuated in women. The garment will have to accommodate for that. So what you'll notice with the waist area, the front waistband will typically droop in a little bit and the back waistband will sit up straight, and that difference will typically indicate the amount of extra fabric that you have. On a garment like this, it doesn't seem like much. It's around 0.75 inches if we measure it, so they kind of drop. But if we want to look at a garment that maybe has a lot less slack, you're going to see, or a lot more slack, you're going to see that rise, or the difference between the front rise and the back rise, be a lot more apparent. And that difference can also be measured when you take the front rise and the back rise. The front rise is measured from the front of the waistband, so the top of the front of the waistband, perpendicularly down to the bottom of the gusset area, right down to where the fabric ends. On the other side, the rear rise, or the back rise, is measured from the top of the back of the waistband down to the bottom of the crotch line as well, and you will notice a discrepancy between those measurements, where the back rise is going to have a little bit more measurement than the front rise, and that'll differ between garment and garment. With ladies' items, it's typically a bit more accentuated because of the female physique, but those measurements will affect each other. We have to understand that when creating designs, we have to take these measurements in relationship to each other. The outseam will affect the inseam can affect the rise, and all three are correlated. It's sort of like algebra. If you have a rise that is too tall, so you have too much rise, what you end up with is also excess fabric in your area. You may kind of get like this webbing effect. It's not necessarily very flattering. It's not something that you want. You do want something that fits well, that has enough fabric in that region, but you don't want excess fabric. You'll end up with these rolls, with these fabric lines coming across. And likewise, if you have too little rise, what you may end up with is not enough fabric to cover up that kind of, let's just say, the curvature required to get a garment from the inside of the crotch area up to the waist, and you'll end up with a garment being pushed down because there's not enough fabric to help it sit up. And you may end up with issues like camel toe issues just because you don't have enough fabric to cover, and you end up with too much tension in that area. Likewise, your outseam and your inseam measurements are going to relate to each other. If you reduce your inseam, you're going to reduce your outseam, but you also have to play with the rise as well. So it's kind of like all three are related, but you can also ignore one and only have two relate depending on what you're prioritizing. So if you want to respect your outseam as the key measure, then you'll go for your outseam and your rise measurements. If you want the inseam, it'll be your inseam and your rise measurements. Likewise, you could also consider your outseam and your inseam and then figure out your rise measurements from those two measurements. So it's a little bit complicated, but if you guys get it down, it is basic algebra. And I highly recommend that you test these things, you get a pair of leggings, measure them out yourself, and you'll see these details for yourself. Hopefully you guys get a little bit of benefit from this video. I want to do more of them. If you want to see different types of garments measured out and how key measurements affect the fit of a garment, leave which garments you want us to measure out in the comments below. I know sports bras are super popular, so we might do that, but measure or mention other things that you want us to explain, and we'll get to it as soon as we can. Thank you guys so much for tuning into FittDesign TV. It's always awesome to have you guys pass by. Thank you so much and have an awesome day.